Well, it's been a while since we have covered a story on this channel, and it just so happens to be that the latest story on Universe is from an alternative universe. Specifically, it is from the Highnoon universe, which has gotten quite a few stories in the past. So at this point, it is a rich universe. Normally, I would try to avoid stories from an alternative universe, because I want to mainly focus on the core canon universe. But not only is the latest story really interesting, but it is also teasing future Highnoon skins, and Riot is not releasing any other stories. So without further ado, let's have a look at the newest Highnoon story called The Stranger on the Road. The story begins on a barren desert filled with nothing but miles and miles of cactus country. It was the road from tenacity to progress. There was a cowboy with enough water to make it to the town, and enough cattle to earn his employer a nice sum at the market. All he had to do was to get there himself with the herd in one piece. The cows kept pace with his mare. They were on track to make it to progress before nightfall, which was a nice boon of its own. Strange beasts had been spotted around these parts when the sun went down. Hellhounds with teeth the size of a man's forearm. Unburied dead still bloated and shambling across the cracked earth. Outsiders hunting down sorry souls who bet untold riches at the casino and lost it all, only to try and run from the wages of their sin. There was nothing good rambling in the dark of the desert night. After a while, the cowboy noticed a speck in the distance. It seemed to be another traveler, going in the same direction. The cowboy hadn't expected to see anybody till he got to the crossroads leading to Fort Knox. There weren't many who would use this old trail. As the lone figure got closer, the cowboy noticed the stranger's jacket dragging through the dirt behind him, and his wide hat casting a shadow over him. They did not change course, and their speed did not quicken, so after a while the cowboy and the herd caught up with him. The horse stopped first, visibly agitated. The cowboy offered a greeting, to perhaps calm the steed. "Howdy, friend." Without so much as a response, the stranger collapsed onto the barren earth. The cowboy swung down and lifted the stranger so his face wouldn't lie in the dirt. The stranger felt lighter than he expected, as if he had hollow bird bones. All the stranger muttered was a plea for water, and so the cowboy let him sip from his canteen. He knew it was half empty, but there were childhood stories about people who didn't help wandering strangers, and these stories haunted him. The stranger wiped his mouth after emptying the canteen, as if lifted of some curse. Golden brown eyes rose to meet their savior. The cowboy saw the stranger couldn't have been much older than him, but his travels through the desert surely took their toll. His skin was sallow, pale hair stuck between his sweaty brow. And yet, there was something unearthly about him. Beautiful in a way that evoked an instinct of fear. Beautiful like a wildfire or a polished knife. "Much obliged," the stranger spoke, adding that he was in his debt. The cowboy stopped himself from impolitely staring, before asking him if he was alright. As if to prove a point, the stranger tried to stand up, only to drop down once again, coughing. In a reflex, the cowboy grabbed his shoulder to support him, only to feel his palm prickling as his fingers wrapped around it. He then released his hold and noticed something beneath the shadows of the coat. Feathers. He looked up and saw the stranger staring back. "I'm fine," the stranger finally answered. The cowboy asked where he was headed. The stranger answered, "Progress." The two were trying to reach the same place, and so they walked. Eventually, their mutual quiet was broken when the cowboy asked, why was he headed to Progress? Apparently, the stranger was trying to catch a train, but he didn't give any more explanation. Next time, it was the stranger who broke the sacred silence. He said he would like to repay the kindness. He didn't like being in debt. At first, the cowboy refused. He was just helping a fellow traveler. But the stranger told him he was too kind. He insisted. He couldn't let such generosity unanswered. Feeling the same fear from before, the cowboy hesitated before asking him what did he have in mind. The stranger shrugged and offered him an old tale of the West. one he had most likely not heard yet. Despite the dead wind and fierce heat, Gooseflesh rose on the cowboy's skin, as he told him he couldn't possibly trouble him with that. But once again, the stranger insisted, and so he began the tale. No one knew who prophesied this one, since the real prophets were killed for their truths long ago, and any who profess the same nowadays are selling snake oil. But this was a real one, from the age before the fall of Haven. Back when a fella felt the joy of corruption and the sting of sanctity, because each of those meant something when they had the other. There was a beginning and an end to all things. The beginning couldn't be stopped. There was no way to stop that they were here. But the end? Well, it was said that the end of all things would come after the fall of Haven's gates, when hell and men have bled the land dry. The flows of life and death would become commerce, taken in by misers of industry, and churned on machines of smoke and brimstone. Perhaps this was already in motion, if you heard tale of the Sulphur rail and its mechanical devil king. Tidings of the end times would arrive on the backs of 5 Harbingers, heralds from all corners of the earth. From the south, the first Harbinger rides an ivory steed, conquering all in her wake. Any who stand in her way shall kneel or burn. From the west, the second Harbinger leaves the land of angels, delivering retribution upon those who slaughter the innocent and damn the holy. Forged in love, broken in death, tempered in vengeance. From the north, the third Harbinger is one with shadow and smoke, balancing the bloody ledgers of sin on the edge of her knife. She is Our Lady of Restitution. From the east, the fourth Harbinger travels through the deep waters of the world, his appetite for all things unsated and unstoppable. He'll consume everything until there ain't nothing left to consume. From above, so below, the final Harbinger walks with death at his side, a spectre sowing decay with every step. He harvests the living crop of man, reaping souls to carry beyond the bounds of heaven and hell and into an unknown country. These 5 will ride together. They will topple the wicked who reap the bounty of imbalance, lay low devils and behemoths of steel, strike down the king of the Sulphur rail himself. The balance of the west is shifting. The coming of the Clockwork Angel and the Gunslinger's revival were just the beginning. Now the Harbingers are here to end what they started. Some say their arrival is what beckons the storm of chaos to wash the West clean of all its sins. Some say they will punish the wicked and usher in a new age of man. This is where the story was interrupted as the stranger swayed, coughing once more. In a heartbeat, the cowboy leapt down and caught the stranger before he could fall. Being taken by the story, the cowboy simply asked the stranger, what did he think about the Harbingers? The stranger chuckled a little bit, his voice rasping. Then he spat out a clump of wet, bloody, white feathers. That's when he answered that they've all been living on borrowed time, and there's nothing that would keep them sinners in debt. He stood slowly, stepping away from the cowboy's support and rising to his full height. That's when the cowboy finally noticed the stranger's hand. Its fingers were sharpened to point in some unholy claw, black as burning pitch, and red as hellfire. It reached up to shed the battered coat, revealing what the stranger truly was. Half of his body roiled with darkness, while his other half erupted into white feathers. There was a crackling hiss coming from his chest where both sides met. The cowboy couldn't imagine how he ever thought the stranger was a man. He heard the stamp of his mare's hoofs behind him, the way she snorted and whined and rolled the whites of her eyes, in fear at the thing that stood before them, so close that either one could reach out and touch the other. The cowboy could run. He should run. Every fiber of his being was screaming at him to turn tail, take his horse, and tear through the desert in any direction that was away from here. But his knees trembled, his hands quaked, and the burning gaze from beneath the brim of that hat fixed him in place. A train whistled in the distance, And somewhere in the back of the cowboy's mind, he registered that as strange, since they were miles from the nearest railroad. A shame, that would be his final thought. But then again, the West don't care one whit for the dignity of men. The stranger conjured a blade on his clawed wrist, stepped closer, closer, and only then, as he wiped away a tear rolling down the cowboy's cheek with a heavenly hand, did he slip the hellish knife between his ribs. Much obliged. The stranger murmured into his ear as the knife slid out of his body, as the body slid out onto the ground, and as the cowboy's soul slid out of both, collapsing to the dirt. The earth rumbled in the distance. Had this been 5-10 years ago, looking down at the body wouldn't have meant nothing to the stranger. He wouldn't have felt a damn thing, wouldn't have stopped to think of it, wouldn't have left a body behind at the height of his power when his form was more shadow than man, and he was free to slake his bloodlust as he pleased. But it wasn't 5 or 10 years ago. Now he gazed at the wreckage of it all, the blood on his blade, the thin death rattle of the cowboy's breath on his chest stilled. He reached down to help up the wayward soul, reduced to a blank-eyed shade of a man, and rested a hand upon his shoulder. Where once was fear and curiosity and kindness, now there was nothing at all. The earth shook beneath the stranger's feet. The train whistled again, a deathly scream into empty air. It grew louder and louder and louder still, until the bowels of the cracked desert earth split asunder, and from the chasm rose the stench of smoke, the screech of metal on tracks, and finally, the sulphur rail itself. It was a beast of cinders and fire, ash and coal, a titan of steel machinery that dwarfed men and monstrosities, with a grandiosity only outdone by the conductor of the train himself. The sight of it was enough to drive any sane mortal mad. The train's hulking form cast a noonday shadow, blocking out a corner of the sun. A railroad formed up beneath it as the wheels churned and slowed, and eventually came to a shuddering, seething stop. Steam greeted them as the doors hissed open. The stranger stepped onto the train, guiding the soul of the cowboy over to the devil serving as the ticket taker. The devil nodded at the exchange. This fare would do. The foreign pang shuddered under his ribs as the soul shuffled toward the other passengers huddled in the next car over. Rail barons and beggars, gentlemen and gunslingers, cowboys and angels, all riding the same sorry train to hell. The stranger grimaced and turned back to the ticket taker as the doors shut behind him. "Tell your boss Talon's here, and I want to talk. The Harbingers are gathering." The ticket taker blanched and scurried off, leaving him alone in the train as it idled on the track, an impatient machine. The train's conductor was a particular man, with lavish tastes and an uncompromising will. Every window was filigreed in sterling silver, every curtain draped in precious velvet. The sulphur rail was an expensive ticket in all regards. Out of the corner of his eye, Talon caught sight of someone watching him from the doorway of the next car. He could feel his jaw tighten under his teeth. "What you're looking at?" he growled, but the cowboy's soul didn't move. Anger simmered in his heart, impotent and helpless, a reminder that he never had one to begin with, and was worse off for the addition of it. He stalked over to the soul, staring him down as he had done when the fella was alive, but now he didn't waver at the fire burning in Talon's eyes. Indifferent. "Do you want me to apologize?" The soul just kept on staring. "Do you want me to say something?" The soul just kept on staring. "I'm sorry. There, you happy?" The soul just kept on staring. Talon spat, reaching to grip the shadow of the cowboy's neck, when the soul lifted a hand to Talon's cheek and wiped away a tear from the space between his eyes. He had never wanted to weep before, a pitiful act, the sanctimonious mourning of angels and men for lost lives that had never been theirs to begin with. But all the rain that never touched the desert fell inside his chest, a storm unstoppable, threatening to water the West in tears and drown him where he stood. Talon tore himself away, cast his gaze out the window and what he left behind. The lonely road to progress. An empty canteen. The blank stare of a body that once was a man. And a herd of dead-eyed cattle stepping over the corpse of their shepherd as they gaze the barren ground, searching for something green among the mess of dead white feathers, smudged with blood and brimstone. Maybe they all deserved what was coming. And that was the latest Highnoon story. Of course, the main teaser of this story are the 5 Harbingers. We actually know 4 of them. There is Leona, Varus, who highly likely fought Talon. That's what we can see in their splash art. And we learned that Talon was originally a demon, and Varus was the angel who corrupted Talon with the angelic blood. But then there is also Katarina and Tahm Kench. These are obvious. The 5th one, the one who is harvesting men like crop, is a mystery. You could say the description fits Fiddlesticks, but in this universe Fiddlesticks is a demon, so it has to be someone else. Someone who is related to death. Besides this, Leona's voice lines did kinda confirm more characters. We know that Tahm Kench is kind of her partner. There is also gonna be Twitch, but I'm not sure if he's gonna be the Harbinger. There is also Scion, which I wouldn't be surprised if Scion was actually the train. You know, he also transforms into a train in his other legendary skin. And there is also supposed to be Samira and Victor, neither of which would really fit the 5th Harbinger. But regardless, the point of this story was that we got more lore for the Highnoon universe, there's gonna be a big battle with Mordekaiser, and we got new skins teased at the same time. And the best thing of all of these is, even though Tahm Kench has not been officially announced, everyone is more excited about his skin more than any other of the new ones.